Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 4th of November 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we've got a special news today. There is just so much going on in the United Kingdom and also in the USA. So our guests today are David Scott from Northern Exposure, and we are particularly delighted to welcome back Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. I'm just going to say the weather is cold, chilly, a bit overcast. There are some parts of UK reporting there's a bit of sunshine, but we've got more important things to talk about than the weather today. So let's get on to matters constitutional, Brexit, and the amazing events in the States.
Well, the front pages this morning can only be described as utterly insane. We've got two particularly bad ones here from the Telegraph and the Daily Mail. The judges versus the people and the enemies of the people. So we're presenting these three judges. We're making scapegoats of them. They are our enemies. Government is not our enemy, only the judges. Well, what have we got? We've got Theresa May heading off to Europe to see Jean-Claude Juncker. She's reassuring him that Brexit is not going to be blown off course by this. They're going to appeal it in the Supreme Court. But this confrontation that's being created between people and the judiciary is there to divert from the fact that it's Parliament that really should be the target of this. Now, this is a psychological operation. We've been saying this from the beginning. It's designed to set people off against each other. And I think perhaps a better approach, guys, I'm going to ask each of you for a comment on this in a moment, but better approach might be for everybody on both sides of this discussion to get together and recognise that we're not enemies of each other, and perhaps we should be looking towards the House of Commons. They are acting beyond their authority as usual, well, perhaps we've got a rational discussion that can take place if Parliament's out of the way. I want to highlight this particular article from Reaction website, Establishment versus People. That's a better way to put it. It's the establishment, not the judiciary. A provocation too far. This is by Gerald Warner, who is Scottish. Perhaps David knows a bit about him, Scottish newspaper columnist. Well, it begins not so well because it begins with the sort of subheadline, three judges ruled today that 650 individuals had the right to frustrate the wishes of 17.4 million voters. Well, no, they didn't. We'll come on to that in a second. By the European Referendum Act 2015, he says Parliament temporarily resigned its authority back to the hands of those from whom it is derived, the electorate. He points out that the House of Commons resigned its responsibility on this issue because it was confident the electorate would vote the right way. Now that the electorate voted the wrong way, MPs want to interfere and amend the Brexit process. So we're starting to get closer to the truth here. Then he says the High Court should have refused to hear the case on the grounds that no court could attempt to tamper the will of the nation. But of course, as we pointed out yesterday, the court wasn't attempting to tamper with the will of the nation. The court was ruling on a point of law, which is whether the royal prerogative could be used in order to bring us towards Article 50. The key point here is that the royal prerogative was used to get us into this mess in the first place, unconstitutionally. Two wrongs don't make a right here, so you can't get back out again using the same process. There's different processes to be used. He goes on to say, now there's talk of Parliament asserting itself, taking back control and so on. The reality is it's trying to take back control. It voluntarily relinquished, not from the executive, but from the people. This legal case was nothing to do with maintaining the Constitution and everything to do with neutering the popular decision of the 23rd of June. He goes on to say the backlash from this provocation will exceed anything witnessed in any of our lifetimes. It could lead to very radical reform. The House of Commons needs to be tamed. Well, I think it needs to be a bit more than tamed. But he goes on to point out that we find ourselves in a constitutional crisis on the scale of 1642 and 1688. Well, let's just look at that because here's some of the other front pages that the media have pulled out today. Odds slashed on 2017 election, odds cut on Brexit election in spring. Well, absolutely not, because the constitutional crisis didn't start with this ruling. The constitutional crisis started years ago, decades ago. and we're starting to see the fruits of that. So let's remind ourselves about why it is not possible for there to be a 2017 election, and that is because of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. One of the constitutional reforms that was done within this last two parliaments, since the Tories became the government, as it were. Remember the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, it was passed by the coalition government. The next general election isn't going to take place till 2020. To overturn that, they've got to have either a vote of no confidence in the Tory government. Well, they're not going to have a vote of no confidence in themselves, or they've got to persuade 2/3 of all MPs to vote in favour of an early election. And under the present circumstances, that's pretty unlikely as well. So this isn't going to happen. This is one of the constitutional issues that we face at the moment. And let's not forget this. David Davis, not so long ago, saying we're starting the Brexit process by bringing forward a great repeal bill that would mean the European Communities Act ceasing to apply on the day we leave the EU. And he went on to say the Great Repeal Act will convert existing EU into domestic law wherever practical. And what I want to know is, among all the Brexiters complaining about this judge's decision, where's the outrage about this? Where's the outrage that we are going to bring all EU law into domestic law? I don't see any of it. So I think we need to stop focusing on 3 judges, when the government is where we need to be looking at. All that needs to happen is that we revoke the treaties and we repeal the law, which is inappropriate, the EU-based law. And of course, we're taking this to the Supreme Court. Now, what does that mean? It means that it's just another diversion, right? Now, here's the key point. We have been in constitutional crisis for years. We've got the breakup of the union going on. We've got city-states being set up. We've got abolition of juries. We've got prevention of public oversight in court cases. We've got demolition of the separation of powers. We've got wholesale privatisation of public services. We've got EU military integration, which is happening no matter what happens with Brexit. We've got investigatory powers coming in. We've got international free trade agreements of the type of TTIP and so on. We have this notion that public servants have the power to do anything. This is turning the Constitution on its head. This list goes on. I could name a dozen other things. What meaning does Brexit have while these policies continue unchallenged? It has no meaning. And this is just another diversion. And people, I think, need to waken up to that.
Well, of course, Mike, what we've consistently seen is a focus on Europe and the EU. The big bête noire was always the EU. The EU we saw, and I'm going to mention the man's name again, Nigel Farage, always pointing at the European Union, never pointing at what was actually happening at the belly of the beast, which is the City of London and Westminster, but all of these dangerous changes going in on UK. And now it's all sort of being hidden under the smokescreen of the so-called Brexit.
David, what do you make of it?
Well, an interesting article from Gernot Warner there. He's a long-established columnist in Scotland with a traditional view of the world, and he often sees things quite differently from the current political fashion, and is all the better for it. The concentration on the judges is strange and is inappropriate. We've been through this on a smaller scale with no to name person, because we fought that was fought successfully, ultimately legally, right the way down to the Supreme Court. But really, the decision on that comes down to the people. If the people of Scotland say no to it, no matter what the government might do, no matter what the judges might say, it won't matter. If we are determined it's no, then it's no. And we need a lot more of that approach. And we need a lot more of the lawful approach and holding these people up to the appropriate standards. Westminster's clearly failing. The idea that Parliament has got sovereign control over the people is thoroughly un-British, is not in accordance with the Constitution. In Scotland, we're quite clear on that. There seems to be more smoke and mirrors on that south of the border. And all in all, well, it's a crisis, and I thought your list of aspects of that crisis was excellent.
Patrick, have you any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's extraordinary, Mike, because I remember sitting there at that desk with you in the summer, in the immediate aftermath of the Brexit vote, and both you and Brian correctly I might add, outlined that this government has no intention of leaving the EU. The whole controlled opposition was fabricated with Boris Johnson from the beginning, and then you now have an unelected, effectively an unelected government sitting right now, and I would say becoming more unpopular by the week. So a constitutional crisis, absolutely correct on the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. This basically stripped the people, as it were, the ability to basically call an election. And I think you've had about 2 or 3 instances in the last 6 months where it would have been the right time to have a general election. And so that's been taken away from the people. So if you've ever had a constitutional crisis in Britain, it's now. And I just remember I think it was 10 days ago, Theresa May went to much fanfare in the media saying, Brexit means Brexit, and I'm going to outline an aggressive strategy, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is all falling on deaf ears right now. So what the other big problem is the Tories, the Conservative Party, are the Machiavellian geniuses of all time. They've managed to basically eliminate every other party that might be seen as a third-party contender, and you've gone right back to a binary, and then you have a convenient rebellion within the Labour Party against Jeremy Corbyn. So where's UKIP now? They're pretty much off the board. The Liberal Democrats decimated after entering into a coalition. All you have is basically a party with no mandate in power with an unelected prime minister. It's an incredible situation. But we're back to the drawing board, Mike. The best of both worlds document, which was presented by David Cameron, the document itself, which initiated the call for an EU referendum, and that document is still in play, a renegotiated relationship with Europe. And what's funny as well is Nigel Farage has been all over the United States media, basically giving commentary on all the networks about the U.S. election and how the Brexit effect and so forth. And I was just kind of laughing under my breath every time I see Nigel Farage on Fox News or any other major U.S. network or talk radio show. And all the American hosts here are all fawning over him, Nigel Farage. He's the man that brought Britain freedom again, and et cetera. And the tropes are endless, basically. And he just laps it up. He absolutely loves it. And then he's released a quote in the U.S. media yesterday saying, I fear that an hour of betrayal is upon us, and all this. It's so melodramatic and ridiculous. And you look at this Brexit facade crumbling, right before your eyes. And Nigel Farage is still trying to hold it up. And all the while, I'm asking Brian and Mike, I'm asking, what happened to UKIP? It just disappeared. It dissolved into nothing.
Well, I'll just come back on that quickly, because I'm going to say actually the body of the party hasn't dissolved at all. There's still a lot of extremely good people out there doing their best. But what's happened is the leadership has dissolved. And of course, the leadership has been able to dissolve because Nigel Farage, as we predicted he would do, totally has betrayed the parties, waved the false flag, said, we're going to get out of Europe. And then he was waving his arms saying, we've achieved it. We've got Brexit. It's all over. I can step down as leader. I'm a bit frightened, but I'm going to go in the public domain in America. So the leadership of UKIP has been dissolved. But I'm very pleased to say that there are a lot of extremely good and very awake UKIP people out there. And I think with suitable encouragement and maybe a little bit of refocusing on where the enemy really is, which is Westminster and the City of London, we can get some of these people active again.
Well, David, Nippy had something to say in First Minister's questions.
Nippy, now, this is Nippy's standard response, essentially, to all questions at First Minister's questions. Her standard response is, how dare you? How dare you ask me that? You Tory, you. But she goes a little further here.
Yes, I'll read out the full quote. It says, I start to wonder whether Ruth Davidson is my secret First Minister's questions agent, that she can get up today of all days and talk about constitutional uncertainty frankly beggars belief. There's not a lot of competence in Ruth Davidson's preparation for First Minister's questions based on that. This is a day when her party has just been overturned in the courts, where the courts have said their intention to trigger Article 50 without a vote in Parliament is illegal. For her to come and talk about constitutional uncertainty is frankly beyond words. And of course, for those who don't know, Ruth Davidson is the leader of the Conservative Party in Scotland.
Yes, and she emphasised the word courts as she said this. Overturned in the courts, it's illegal. And of course, we've just had the example of the SNP being overturned in the courts, and within an hour, her deputy, John Swinney, appeared on television to say, we're going ahead anyway. It just needs a tweak. It'll all be fine. Nothing's changed here. So they will respect the courts when it's in the political, to the political advantage to do so, and they ignore the courts, or try to, when the political wind blows the other way. It's very hypocritical.
Yes. So tell us, who is Ian McWhirter?
Ian McWhirter is a long-established and very well-respected commentator and journalist in Scotland. Here, writing for the Herald. I think he's got links to the Beeb as well, but we won't hold that against him. And he has been one of the people who voted and supported, after some soul-searching, a yes vote at the independence referendum. So he wanted Scotland to be an independent country, and has had a lot of concerns about the performance ever since of what the SNP have been doing to our nation. And he's talking here about singing. It might be a surprise to you in the South, and it certainly be a surprise to Patrick, that you can be arrested in Scotland for singing. You can get up to 5 years if you sing the wrong song in the wrong place. And the piece of legislation that does this is called the Offensive Behaviour at Football and Threatening Communications Act. Okay, so we're criminalising being offensive. Now, this is always a dangerous thing. Let me just give you his summary of the problem. The summary is that the OBFA created an entirely new legal concept, a category of person who might be offended by something, even if there was no evidence of such offence being taken. As the SNP supporting legal expert Andrew Tickle described it, in short, the court must invent a whole cast of touchy, grievance-seeking, conspiratorial, irrational figures and ask whether they might kick off in response to the hapless accused conduct. This is madness. It then tests the offensive behaviour against this construct with predictably inconsistent results. That's what's passing for law in Scotland at the moment. And this article also goes on to point out that the total number of convictions last year was 79, compared to 15,000 for breach of the peace, the common law crime which had covered this up until the SNP decided to legislate. The SNP point out that 79 convictions proves that the Act is working and deterring such behaviour, and this is clearly nonsense.
Well,
We'll just stay silent at that point. Yeah, I thought it might have been singing the truth about what was going on in SNP. I could understand them getting wary about that.
Right, well, we've got quite a bit to get through, David, so bring us quickly up to date with what's going on with the Dohertys, if you could.
Right, we hadn't heard from Brian and Janice for over a month, and we heard from them today. They're in quite a bad way. They are still free. They are still under enormous pressure. They're still being followed. They are in extreme physical peril, lack of food, lack of shelter, this sort of thing, no funds. And a few people are trying to help a little bit on that, on those practical grounds. The situation continues. They remain under surveillance, they remain under pressure, they remain in Ireland, but they do remain for the moment free. The article which you put up there briefly on the screen is a 2-page summary of the case, which we've prepared, and we hope to have that downloadable as a PDF on the website so that people can print that out and hand it out or give it to friends and relatives. And it summarises just what the situation is and how little is being done. On the subject of doing little, that brings us to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. a man who does a lot is Robert Green, and he's been in touch with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and asked them, what are they doing in Ireland, in a foreign country, to help the Dochertys? And he got a reply, and I don't know if you've got that to hand.
You've got it. We're in the wrong order here, so we can't show it just at the moment, David.
We were going to come on to that, David. Maybe you'd like to hold it till 2025 in the sequence.
I do beg your pardon. Yes, we'll come to that later then. So that's so the situation with the Dochertys is they remain in great peril, but they remain free. And the fight goes on.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, on the subject of the Dochertys, on the subject of other child abuse survivors, on the subject of many people who've had homes and businesses stolen, let's focus a little bit on supposedly the Constitution and the rule of law. So we'll bring in the good old BBC, which of course back in July was crowing that we had our first female Lord Chancellor, Elizabeth Truss. And she made some promises, according to the BBC. She took her oath and pledged to respect the rule of law, defend judicial independence and ensure effective support for the courts. They went on, apparently, she said, I'm a great supporter of reform and modernisation, two really key words. Reform and modernisation throughout the courts and tribunal system, and that urgent task will be high on my agenda in the months ahead, as I know it is for senior members of the judiciary. And interestingly enough, the BBC back in July was happy to bring up that the ancient role dates back to Anglo-Saxon times. Now, the BBC doesn't usually like mentioning those sorts of times because everything, I think, started with Rome. But let's have a look at this very interesting lady. So she moves into position as Lord Chancellor. We've got the Ministry of Justice created on the 9th of May 2007. And let's just think about this. This lady's not trained in law. So we say she's totally reliant on handlers, advisors to make constitutional judgments. But she made this pledge that she's going to defend judicial independence. She's going to respect the law. Does that mean she's going to behave herself and do what they say? And she's going to make sure that nobody points a finger at the judges? Well, she hasn't done too well so far, judging by those headlines, Mike. So who created this interesting little organisation? Well, of course, it was our old trustworthy Prime Minister, Tony Blair. And how is it broken up? Well, it's got a constitutional affairs section, but we know that the Constitution's being dismantled. And the latest attack is the claim, of course, that Parliament is sovereign. Now, who was put in charge initially? Well, the Death Lord, the Dark Star himself, Lord Falconer, because when he's not messing around with the Constitution, he's very keen on helping people to kill themselves. Absolutely true statement. Check it for yourselves. What's happening in the courts? Well, you've listed part of this, Mike, because we've got privatisation and digitisation of the courts, which is creating chaos and is creating a huge barrier between the public and justice. And in fact, a conversation that a person had with the Nottingham court system earlier this week, the team up there, the court staff, were pulling their hair out that they're grossly undermanned and they can't run an effective court system. We've then got privatisations of the prisons. And of course, we know that they're cutting back. They've got inexperienced cheap staff, and they're withholding prison services to help boost profits. And finally, this lady's in charge of probation, where there's also rapid privatisation, which is leading to great stress amongst the old probation staff. And of course, they can't cope. Risks are being taken with the public. So if we look at what this department has achieved, it is a massive attack on all those areas: constitution, courts, prisons and probation. But it isn't mistrust Truss that's doing it, because of course she's got no experience. So the question is, who are the handlers that are running this? I'm going to be silent on that because I don't know, but I don't get a good feeling about it. So we'll then bring up this. It is an amazing letter, which will be available, written to Miss Truss herself. And the subject of this is people who are suffering. So the lady who's written this letter has mentioned social worker Carol Woods, child abuse victim Melanie Shaw, Brian, Janice, and the children, that should say, the Doherty family. And she says, I cannot believe there is no way to hold rogue elements in police, social services and judiciary to account and to provide these people with a safe place to live and legal aid while they await the opportunity to present their cases to a jury of their peers. Well, that's all disappeared, as is their right under the common law. As yet, none of those named has had the benefit of due process in accordance with our constitution. And towards the end of the letter there, she says, and of course the Doherty family have not been accused of any crime. So basically, a fantastic open letter, but what is it saying? Well, it's saying that we are now in a lawless state where the state takes what it wants, whether it's your house, your business, your car, or your children. David, I'm just going to say, when people say to us, what can we do? They sometimes dismiss the fact you can put pen to paper, but some of these letters are causing huge damage within the government system because they dare not answer them, which was part of the key case with this letter, which was saying, where is the response to my earlier letters?
Yes, they dare not and cannot answer them, and that's a particularly magnificent letter, which pulls together a huge amount of the concern that we're all feeling regarding the failure of the rule of law, and puts it to the right person. And we are, of course, waiting a substantive response.
A response, indeed. Now, just very quickly, before we do a little bit of advertising for the British Constitution Group conference, Highland investigation, how are you seeing things go with that in Scotland?
We will be putting up, I'm not sure if the first article's up, it might well be, and this was the second one, which is about to be launched on the website. This covers what happens when you complain, right? The nature of the response, because we're suggesting that GIRFEC and the approach to looking after children, which claims to get it right, well, that will be tested by how they treat people who point out that they've got it wrong. And we follow one case through here where a father complains about the way a social worker is behaving. Eventually, after many months or years, most of his complaints are actually upheld. But in the interim, he's treated like a pariah. He's lied about. There's false medical information put on his file. He's subjected to multiple parenting assessments. He's not getting access to his children, or the access is being reduced. All the while, there's a Schedule 1 sex offender living with his kids, and that's not viewed as nearly such a problem. So he's viewed as the enemy because he complained, even though his complaint was correct and was eventually upheld, and he still is. And this is what we're seeing. If you're in Highland, if you're under GIRFEC, and you think you can complain, think again.
Okay, well, very serious times. We're going to say for people who want to learn more about the protections the Constitution can give us, then Winchester on the 19th of November is the place to be. We still have some places available at the conference. Tickets have been going extremely well. If you'd like to come, get in there and get your tickets through the website.
And just a reminder that tonight, not tomorrow as it says there, because I took this screenshot yesterday, tonight in Bristol, Syria, civil war or NATO war of aggression or regime change, Vanessa Beeley and the Reverend Andrew Ashdown at the Arc Events, which is 27 Broad Street in Bristol, BS1 2HG. That begins at 7 p.m. I hope to see you there.
Okay, and subject to mortgages, and we've had information coming in this morning about mortgage swindles. This is a vast scam on the nation. But the 5th of November, there's a showing of the Great British Mortgage Swindle film, and a great deal of information in that film about how the international banks have set up the Great Mortgage Swindle. So if you've got a mortgage or had a mortgage, you should be very interested in seeing that presentation.
Okay, so Patrick, let's get on to what's going on in the United States, because if we've got chaos around Brexit, your election process has got to be the most insane clown show I think I've seen in a very long time. So if we start off with your article here from 21st Century Wire, WikiLeaks Hillary Clinton used Saudi, Qatar for funding ISIS, but still took money for the foundation. Is this, tell us the background to this, and is this actually going to hurt Hillary too much?
Yeah, it's pick a scandal. Pick a scandal, any scandal, place your bets, roll up, roll up. This is sort of the election season this year. There's an avalanche of scandals, and one more salacious after another, one tranche of emails after another. It's really hard to process, and I think this is another problem. So the media is completely split in two. You have the pro-Clinton media, which is basically the whole mainstream media, except for probably one network, which is Fox News. So CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, the LA Times, these are all pro-Clinton. So they're not covering this story. And this is perhaps the most explosive of all the WikiLeaks emails. And what this is telling us is nothing new. It's nothing new for me. In a way, it kind of vindicates everything that the so-called alternative media have been talking about really since the ISIS crisis began in June 2014. But what it does is it validates something that we've been talking about, and in that way, it's valuable. And this is an email between John Podesta and Hillary Clinton, whereby they said, look, you need to basically press hard on this issue regarding Saudi Arabia and Qatar. We know they're funding ISIS. However, they want to make a donation to the Clinton Foundation. A number of Gulf monarch states have poured money into this foundation. So what it does is it proves to the public that they knew that and why this is important is because before it was seen as, oh, there's some private citizens in Saudi Arabia, and some rogue sheiks in Qatar that are funding ISIS, al-Nusra Front, Ahrar al-Sham, Noor al-Din al-Dinzinki, Jaish al-Fatah, and all these other, the gaggle of al-Qaeda affiliated Takfiri terrorist groups in Syria, etc. Now we know that it's not rogue sheiks or wealthy individuals in Saudi Arabia. It is the governments. So I've known this and believed this and many others all along, but this provided the proof. So this is the ultimate smoking gun, which the media and I believe the establishment will do anything to basically allow this to be highlighted. Hence, I would agree with some commentators that the announcement last Friday of the FBI case being opened, FBI Director Jim Comey saying we're opening the case because of emails found on Anthony Weiner's laptop. That sounded to me like a red herring, and a number of commentators have said, well, that's actually, this is a distraction, essentially, to keep from people or the press looking at what's in the WikiLeaks emails so soon before the election. And so we have some hugely damning emails that have come out, things that would turn the tide of any election in history. But there's just been such an overwhelming load of information. And the fact that the point is here that the media don't cover it, then it's not a scandal. It can be the biggest scandal in the world, but if the media ignore it or blackball it, then it's not going to get traction. Therefore, it has no impact. Only that which is covered is effective. Okay, so we don't have a free press anymore in the United States, and this election cycle has proven that to people. The amount of collusion between the mainstream media and the Hillary Clinton campaign is immense, feeding questions and debates, and that alone really should call into question the integrity of a network. No internal investigations, no one fired. Even the interim Democratic chairwoman, Donna Brazile, who was caught in this other scandal of feeding debate questions, she hasn't stepped down. So this reminds me of the Tony Blair government, or the new realpolitik is that we don't resign, we don't throw our own to the wolves. No matter how bad the scandal is, they'll just sit there and tough it out because they know that effectively it is a kind of a one-party state in America at the moment. It's an establishment party, as it were. So no one's gonna burn for that. And so it's an incredible story. Some of the things Julian Assange has offered up to the public, I think, is very valuable. And he basically reaffirmed what we said: the Russian hacking hoax. This is something that the Clinton campaigns hung her hat on. The Russian hacking hoax. That fact that Russia is feeding WikiLeaks these emails. This has gone out of control talking point to hysterical proportions by Hillary Clinton herself with no proof whatsoever. I came out and said that, in a kind of overt fashion a couple of days before Assange announced that. And I've just felt that it was time to say that because it was ridiculous. And at the time when I said that, people said, well, how can you say it's a hoax? 2 days later, Julian Assange says, look, Russia's not giving us the emails. More than likely, from other intelligence leaks in the U.S., it's coming from the United States. It's not coming from Moscow. And not at no point has any piece of information been refuted for its accuracy or authenticity. And so, again, it's shoot the messenger. And I think the Clinton campaign made a strategic decision that they thought they could bracket Donald Trump with Vladimir Putin. Therefore, by blaming Russia for the Podesta email dumps, that somehow this will be an effective campaign strategy. The White House was also all in on this. They adopted it as well, and they released something from the National Intelligence Office saying that 17 intelligence agencies believe that Russia is most probably involved and it has all the fingerprints of the Kremlin, etc. This is completely fake as well. So to the White House and the Clinton campaign working in lockstep, and it's a very dangerous and sad day when you have someone who wants to be president, and you have the White House itself simultaneously scapegoating and demonizing a nuclear power, a member of the UN Security Council in Russia, and using it purely for political purposes in order to achieve their ambitions of power. Assange said it perfectly. He feels sorry for Hillary Clinton. He said this is someone who has, in her blind pursuit of ambition, has eaten herself alive in her pursuit of ambition. And the conspiracy theories being thrown out by Clinton herself on her Twitter account that Donald Trump has a secret Russian server in one of his hotels, and just total desperation. It is pathetic, and it's she will be indicted. She is the first president-elect, if she wins, that will have already. She will be indicted, or something will happen. She will not last 18 months in her first term. It's impossible. There will be a constitutional crisis, something huge.
Yes.
Patrick, thank you for that. I wonder whether you could just give us a bit of comment. One senator, it seems to me, to be making an incredible impact, and that's Trey Gowdy, the man who headed up the Benghazi inquiry. And I think he was on Fox News in the last couple of days. He was actually sticking up for the FBI Director Comey and saying, well, this man was in a really difficult position because if he didn't report that he'd got these other emails off the husband of Hillary Clinton's, Hillary Clinton's aide's husband had those emails that the FBI have now locked onto. But Gowdy was saying, well, the FBI director was in between a rock and a hard place. If he sat on it and didn't do anything, then after the election, he was going to be in trouble. So he just came forward with a simple statement, a letter saying that they were going to investigate. Can you give us any more on the impact of Trey Gowdy? He seems to have just made a huge change in how do we describe it? Power, I suppose, within the Senate.
Well, Trey Gowdy was chairing the Benghazi hearings, I think, and he's been pushing this email hearing. I will disagree. I don't think he's made any. I think Trey Gowdy is, the person who's in front of the cameras, as is Jason Chaffetz, seen to be pit bulls, attacking the Clintons and putting pressure on Jim Comey. The point here is that James Comey, FBI director, if he was in a rock and a hard place last week and that forced his hand to do what he had to do, that's a situation he himself created by not recommending prosecution back in July. He admitted Hillary Clinton lied about handling classified information, that she was careless. She shouldn't have had a home server in the first place. I mean, by God, she's U.S. Secretary of State. So what happened was he basically caved in my opinion, to political pressure by the White House and the DOJ. And one of the reasons is this scandal goes all the way up to the president. Okay, Barack Obama lied in public about knowledge of Hillary Clinton's private server because Obama himself was communicating with her with a private email account, bobama@ameritech.net. Okay, so he already lied about it, so it goes all the way to him. He had knowledge of it. So to protect the president, they had to close ranks. This is exactly what happened with Watergate. And the FBI was compromised in the Watergate investigation. Likewise, the FBI has been compromised on this scandal, but it's also to cover up the Clinton Foundation investigation, which apparently is ongoing, but the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, has effectively blocked 2 grand jury investigations, one into Hillary's email server, second into the pay-to-play allegations of the Clinton Foundation. There's plenty of evidence to prosecute right now on a RICO statute, racketeering and influence and organized crime for the Clinton Foundation. I mean, easily. I mean, I'm not even a judge or a lawyer. I could prosecute that case just basically based on what's on the table. It's a joke. The email server, absolutely. They're giving away immunity to people. They would have had Anthony Weiner's laptop had there been a grand jury. That would have been discovered in that process already. So Jim Comey at every turn, and I'll contend that he has been there at every turn to somehow protect the Clintons throughout his career. It doesn't matter what party he's in, whether he's Republican or Democrat. He was, but he always seems to be there in their shadow. In a way, you could say he's kind of an elite fixer. He's just conveniently in the right place at the right time, and he himself doesn't have to do anything illegal. But what he does is he helps to, negotiate an outcome with the Mark Rich case, pardoning Mark Rich, with the HSBC drug cartel money laundering case. He was right in the middle of this. With Loretta Lynch as well. They worked at the same law firm, I believe, in Washington, D.C. So they're all served. So what you have is the establishment have these key people, and I think Jim Comey is one of these key people. He's shuffled around and moved around and put in key positions, and he's always able to sort of affect a certain outcome, which always seems to favor the establishment in a way. And so they put him in charge of the FBI because he did such a great job when they put him on the board of HSBC to basically police the HSBC, after they were caught laundering money for terrorist groups and drug cartels.
Okay.
And he was rewarded for that by his FBI director position. So I don't have a lot of confidence in Jim Comey, and I think he needs to be moved out of the way, and the Attorney General needs to be recused from all of this, and they need to prosecute, basically, because there will be a constitutional crisis if they don't.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, right. We'll get back onto the subject of children then. The government in the UK is about to set up a new regulatory structure for social workers. And this is quite an interesting development, I think. I'm going to ask David for comment on this in a second. Our social work reform policy and proposed changes to the Children and Social Work Bill is how they're describing it. They're proposing a series of changes to the Children and Social Work Bill following discussions and with members of the House of Lords and sector stakeholders over the summer. They're going to publish some amendments to the bill. They're going to create a new regulator called Social Work England. Social Work England will have a clear focus on professional regulation and ensure public protection, operate at arm's length from government, have clear lines of accountability, maintain a register of social workers. Do we not do that already?
It's supposed to, but of course it's been breached.
Yes. Run fitness to practice hearings, set initial education and training standards, raise these over time, set professional standards and raise those over time as well. And it also provides for independent oversight of social work England by the Professional Standards Authority. So we're going to have a regulator of the regulator as well, because we need that. Well, that bill continues and goes through, passes through the House of Lords on the 8th of November. David, I know you probably haven't seen this, but what are your thoughts on having a regulator for social work?
My thoughts are that what this will achieve is it will make a bad situation worse. I can hear nothing in what you've just read out there that actually addresses the core nature of the problem, which, as I understand it, is this. When social work became first established, the profession viewed its role as to support and help families. They viewed the amount of wisdom, the amount of governance that they could bring to the situation as extremely limited. They viewed their role with a great deal of humility, and they recognised that parents were the experts in their own children, and they intervened rarely, gently, and cautiously. What we now have is a profession that is only concerned with child protection. There is no social work profession anymore. It's just child protection. Child protection is an industry. Child protection is based on bad law, which largely comes from the UN. Child protection is the reason we have child stealing by the state, forced adoption,
and trafficking, courts, in fact.
Trafficking, secret courts, and the whole panoply of abuse. So there's nothing in there that's going to address any of that.
Okay, well, I wouldn't disagree with that. Would you like to just comment on the Robert Greene letter that you mentioned earlier? We can bring that up on screen.
Please, yes. This is Robert has written to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and the question was essentially, what are you doing to help the Dohertys? And the reply here says, we are aware of the Dohertys. So say we advise. Let's see. I would like to reassure you that we have provided consular assistance to them. That is not how the Dohertys would describe it. And they sympathise that it must be distressing for the Dohertys to have their 4 children violently seized by the Irish authorities. And then they say, when a child is overseas, it is the responsibility of the local statutory children's services in that country to make any decisions relating to the child's welfare. I thought it was the responsibility of the parents. But apparently the Foreign and Commonwealth Office seems to think that when you go abroad as a British citizen, that you are at the mercy and instruction of whatever local child protective services decide to do to you, because the responsibility is theirs, it would seem, not the parents. So that's very worrying.
Yeah. It's quite incredible. You go overseas, somebody takes your children, don't expect the British government to help at all, because Boris has just said, well, we're not going to do anything. Well, let's just sort of end on a little bit of a constitutional flavour. We contacted local Plymouth MP Johnny Mercer, ex-army. Guy says that he's there for the veterans champion, really. We contacted him to ask about Sergeant Alexander Blackman. This is the Royal Marine that's been in prison for 3 years for killing a wounded Taliban on the battlefield in conditions of immense stress. We were curious to know why Mr. Mercer wasn't at the recent event in London, the Royal Marines parade for Sergeant Blackman. And in this email, I asked if he could please provide a media statement as to why he was not present to give support to Al Blackman and his family, and to clarify what Mr. Mercer was now doing in person to change the situation, support Sergeant Blackman and secure his earlier earliest release. Well, I thought that was a fairly straightforward and polite email. This is the response that came back, and this is the key bit. In respect of your query, Johnny was not present and was away at a previously scheduled commitment. He also does not presume to comment on individual cases that have been adjudicated because of the principle of separation of powers between the legislature and the judiciary. Apologies for that. To do otherwise would be inappropriate. So a very simple question, what was he going to do? And all of a sudden, back comes a very complicated response, which is all about separation of powers. So I was a bit puzzled about this and simply said that this was a false reply designed to obfuscate matters and avoid a simple question. And basically, I repeated the question. I said it was simple and straightforward. What was he actually doing to help Sergeant Blackman? And I'd said I'd like a proper reply. I then got this reply from the same gentleman, Ben Colton. It says, I would have to object quite strongly at your characterization. The system of checks and balances is a well-established constitutional principle in the UK. So quite remarkable. We ask an MP, what are you actually doing to help something? And suddenly the Conservative Party is immersed in matters constitutional. Well, we thought your viewers and listeners would like to learn a little bit more about Ben Colton because he's the man who sent me the email. We had a little look on LinkedIn. And, well, his constitutional knowledge started at McDonald's. So this is obviously a good place to be. This is 2013. Then he worked at the Range, where I'm going to say a logistics assistant, I believe is a shelf stacker. But then he becomes a researcher for Oliver Colville. We'll remember that's the hedgehog Conservative MP. And now he's a researcher for Johnny Mercer. And he's replying and telling me that my question can't be answered due to constitutional issues. Now, before we are too hard on this young man, somebody suggested that maybe there was something else afoot. And so the question is, was Ben Colton given the response he did from Conservative headquarters? If so, this would suggest that the Conservatives have formulated policy on Sergeant Blackman, and that would actually make him a political prisoner, in that nobody in the Conservative government will speak unless it's a predisposed party line. So we've got a very brave Royal Marine sergeant banged up in prison, Tony Blair strutting the world stage and a millionaire, something disgraceful, and local MP Johnny Mercer is sending very strange and obfuscatory emails about the Constitution. Patrick, just final few seconds from you. The state of UK at the moment is appalling. America seems to be falling into disrepute. No wonder Putin doesn't know how to form his foreign policy.
Yeah. They could only wish for the sort of approval ratings enjoyed by Vlad over in Moscow. But one thing I'm going to leave you with, one of the most important things about all of this, especially with regards to the U.S. election, you know, the amount of information, it's the swarming that's going on in the alternative media. There's a lot of fake news, a lot of disinformation flying around. We're in a post-literate society, and the danger is in this when chaos ensues, there is nobody who can contextualize and to order and make sense of exactly what people are looking at. The media can't really function that way anymore. It's completely bought and paid for. So what do you have left? The vultures come in. The intellectual vultures come in. They're the lawyers, people in the legal profession. They're all over our media. There are experts. There are news anchors. They're all lawyers. Half the politicians, at least, or most of them on the Democratic side, all lawyers. So they're the ones who are ruling within this chaos right now. And so it's really difficult for people to basically prioritize, they say, out of 30 really debilitating scandals. It's hard for people to prioritize and make sense of it and know what's the most important thing to focus on, and then next and the next. This is the environment that this corrupt establishment, this corrupt government thrives in. And they're able to get away with murder in plain sight, out in the open, without any comeback whatsoever. That is what we're seeing right now. And my biggest fear is that the people will not be held to account who should be held to account for all the things that the public have discovered over the last few months.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you for that. We'll add to that, of course, 21st Century Wire and UK Column will be continuing to do our best to actually analyse what's going on and help people look in the right direction. So keep having a look at that. And thank you very much for joining us at what for you is an unsocial hour. So I think you might be sneaking back to bed now. Thanks very much for joining us. David, any closing remarks for you, but please very short.
On the Sergeant Blackman issue, up on a historical perspective, until very recently, government was law. The quality of the government was defined by the quality of the law. And the biblical example of this is Solomon and his wise decisions, which got to the nub of the question and cut through lies and such things. And in all the things I've read about Solomon, I never, ever remember him saying to someone coming before his throne, I'm sorry, I can't comment on an individual case.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, that brings us to close of today's news. Thank you both very much for joining us. Really excellent. And well, November the 5th coming up. So, of course, we wouldn't be allowed to do something outrageous and blow up Parliament as it was tried previously. But we can enjoy some fireworks and think of possibilities. We'll be back same time on Monday. Please join us then. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.